All right, guys, let's start. I just want to let you guys know. Thank you for attending here at, from the writer's cabin. And apparently, by accident, Craig and I wore the Brent Renaud Foundation shirts completely by accident. I thought I was going to surprise him, and now he's surprising me. And this is not a plug, but this is the sweatshirt, and he's got the T-shirt. So if you guys after this want to give the Brent Renaud Foundation support journalists around the world in honor of his brother. You can go to, where do they go? Is it the BrentRenaudFoundation.org or what is it?
It is.
Yeah, the BrentRenaudFoundation.org. And so Craig is Brent's brother, and Craig and I have known each other a long time and worked together on projects. And the Renaud brothers have worked for me, and I've worked for them. And we're always trying to spread other corporations' money around to each other. And in this particular case, Craig has made this film. I know a lot of you have tried to see it. If you've seen it, let us know on the chat. I know a lot of people on my Facebook page have seen it. Armed Only with a Camera: The Life and Death of Brent Renaud is a movie that HBO. It's on HBO Max right now. It's streaming. You can find it there. Craig, are you doing any more films premieres anywhere? I'm sure for the Oscar run we're going to have some, but anywhere else other than LA?
Not that I'm aware of. It's kind of in the works right now, so I can let you know as soon as I know them.
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, this movie that we made, Craig directed, and Juan Arredondo was my film student at Columbia as well. He's on the film, and a bunch of other people have helped work on it. I'll let Craig explain that. But let's just start with a little bit about how did you guys tell us a little bit about growing up in Little Rock, Arkansas? It's not exactly a place for Hollywood filmmakers.
Yeah, I mean, we grew up on a hill. The neighborhood was called Overlook, but it overlooked the Arkansas River, and Little Rock was still growing. I mean, you could still get into the woods from your backyard. It's much more suburban like now, but at that time, I mean, we lived on a dead end street, and we could go down to the bottom of the dead end street and we would follow our dog. We had this Brittany Spaniel dog named Rachel that used to drive my dad crazy because he couldn't keep her in the fence. And so we would follow Rachel to the river because we knew she would always get us home by dark. And it was like Stand By Me. I mean, we would follow the railroad tracks and walk all day and explore. And that's how we grew up, and we were latchkey kids, and our parents were working. So we were bored and entertaining ourselves. And I can remember cameras being around the house. If you see the film, you'll see all the Super 8 film footage that my mom preserved. And they actually did a very good job filming too. Like when I unearthed all that footage and you look at the camera work, they didn't know what they were doing, but we have some great archives from our childhood during those times. And Brett,
Brett was your older brother.
He was my older brother. He was 2.5 years older.
And he was the one that first started playing around with the cameras, right? It was still cameras at the beginning.
Yeah, my dad gave him a Minolta still camera. You'll hear him talk about it in the film, and we have a photograph of him holding it. And he said that was when he first thought about journalism. He said he loved the way it felt in his hand and how it looked like a movie camera. He also had a transistor radio and listened to BBC at night. And
this was young, right? Like really young.
It was very, very, very young. We were always kind of dreaming about adventures of getting outside of Arkansas,
Yeah. And what do you think, though, about Arkansas that helps shape you guys as filmmakers that is different than those people who didn't grow up in sort of a rural southern town?
I think it's a combination of where we're from. I think, people that are from the South, understand the hospitality part of it, and not the fake kind of hospitality, like, a genuineness, like a simpleness that is authentic. And I think our parents were like that. My grandmother and my mom were social workers. My dad was a recovered alcoholic and always sponsoring people from AA, and there was always people in and out of our house. And I just think we had loving parents who cared about doing good in the world, and we were raised to care about people. And, I think that that helped us when we started getting into this work, that we were authentic when we started doing these stories, that we genuinely thought that we could use our camera and start going to these places to tell people's story.
What was the first step for the brothers in terms of becoming filmmakers? I mean, I know that, he was off at school thinking about becoming a filmmaker, and you followed him into this profession, and you guys became these sort of, I mean, honestly, guys, the people who are listening, these guys made some of the best documentaries in the United States over the last 20 years. And, they started out as this sort of like dynamic duo, barely any hair on their face. I mean, they're really super young when you started doing it. Tell us a little bit about that.
I just saw somebody start listening, Cindy, who we worked with in Little Rock. That's cool.
Hey, Cindy. Excellent.
Um, yeah, I mean, so Brent was getting his master's at Columbia in sociology, and he saw a film by John Alpert. And John Alpert is a longtime documentary filmmaker who has a community television center in Chinatown in New York City called the Downtown Community TV Center, where they had internships, but John also produced his films out of there, mostly for HBO. And Brent saw his film and he was so inspired. He went down the next day begging for an internship. Um,
And John's
got
actually
to,
executive producer on this film as well.
and
Just
he
so you
is.
guys
He's the
know, and they've
executive producer of this
worked
film.
together since your all's first film.
That's right. And not long after that, I remember having a conversation with Brent. I was at the University of Oregon studying anthropology, and getting close to being done with school. And Brent told me that he had started interning at DCTV and talked me into coming out and spending a semester. And I crashed on his couch for a little bit. And then I remember he had like a fold out lawn chair that I slept on for a while until the butt went through. We were very broke at the time, but it was, we were excited because we were embarking on something new. And at the time, nonlinear editing had just started at DCTV, and nobody knew how to use editing on computers. All of John's editors did tape to tape editing, and so we had an opportunity to dive in and teach ourselves. And they would give you a key and you could stay there all hours of the night. And so Brent and I and a handful of other aspiring filmmakers would just stay up all night helping each other with their projects, drinking beer and going out and shooting and learning. And so we did this for years. And then
How old were you
eventually
guys then?
started 20, probably, I was probably 22 at
That's
the
just so you
time.
guys know, that's pretty extraordinary. When, most people are getting out of grad school for, I'd say Columbia where I was teaching, and, they get out at farther after that. But even if they come out early and they're at 24, 25 years old, it's years and years before they make their first film. They're,
I mean,
it's,
by the time we were directing our first film for HBO, I was probably 27, um, 26, 27, which would have meant Brent was 28, 29 years old.
that's still pretty young, man. You know that.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you're going into the room and, at that point, Brett even later in life could barely grow a beard, right? It was like he looked so
Right.
young. And going into HBO and working with them, it's the kind of, what was that first, talk about that first film that you guys made for them, and then the breakthrough, what really became, you became known for, which was really the war journalism. I mean, I don't want to undo all the incredible work that you guys did, because you did so many great projects in other places and even some in the United States. But really what was the breakout was really your National Guard film.
Yeah. So, well, it started with Dope Sick Love, which you can still see on HBO. And
I think
John
it's one of the
Alpert.
most watched documentary films in the history of HBO, if I remember correctly.
Heard that said. And, we had been editing for John for a while at that point, and we had started filming with him, with under his mentorship. And HBO had called him about these characters that they knew about that were in the West Village, and asked John if he was interested in pursuing a film about it. And he said, "I've already done that with Life of Crime. I'm too old to be running around the streets of Manhattan, but I've got these young filmmakers. I think they'd be perfect for it. So they gave us a little bit of development money, and we just saw that as our opportunity. So we just went and lived in the streets. I mean, we literally would take turns going out for 3 days at a time, following, heroin addicted couples on the streets. And then when one of us would get tired, we would call from a payphone, no cell phones at the time, and call Brent at the apartment and be like, I'm over on West 4th Street. Try to come find me. I'm getting tired and I'm running out of batteries. And he would come find me, and we would do a handoff and go sleep, and then just keep doing that. Um, and then that's how we filmed Dope Sick Love like that for a year. And then right as we were finishing Dope Sick Love is when 9/11 happened. And when 9/11 happened, John sat us down and said, I'm going to Afghanistan. John had covered wars for a very long time for NBC um, and all different networks. And he said, I'm going to Afghanistan, and I think you guys are ready. I'm never going to force you to go, but yeah, I think you're ready. And that's what started it. And then we went, Afghanistan, Iraq, at the beginning of the war. And then when I came back from a trip from Iraq, I was at a friend of mine's wedding, and his dad pulled me aside asking me how my trip to Iraq was. And he said, nobody knows this, but they're about to deploy 3,000 Arkansas National Guard soldiers. And he was friends with the general because they served in Vietnam together. And he said, I think I could get you embedded with these guys. And so we got embedded with the Arkansas National Guard through a connection in our home state. And we embedded with them for 6 months. So by the time we went to Iraq with them, we had already been with them for 6 months in Fort Hood training, and just kind of slipped under the radar. And by that time we got to Iraq, these guys really trusted us, because we're all from the same place. And we told them we didn't have an agenda. We just wanted to document this historic deployment. And then that turned into a 10-hour episode for Discovery Times channel.
I
And
think
we were all,
what's interesting about all that is most people don't understand. First of all, to get an embed during that time period, there were about 500 journalists covering the Iraq War, and especially the invasion, the early days of the invasion, which I covered. And when you get there, the first, you're dealing with an insurgency at that point, and you are dealing with um, a bunch of guys who are National Guardsmen, which, with absolutely no disrespect, but they're not the kind of guys who spent every day of their lives on a military base like Fort Bragg and trained day in, day out for combat. And, and some of them may have had some experience and got in the National Guard, but a lot of them didn't. And I think that in and of itself brings a whole different element of danger to what you guys were doing. And not many people wanted to be with the National Guardsmen. If you remember, they were like, oh, I don't want to be with those National Guardsmen. I want to be with, like some conventional unit like the 82nd Airborne, the 101st.
for the 6 months that we spent training with them, they were actually being trained for a peace and stability operation. So this is when things were going well on the ground in Iraq, and everybody, the American soldiers were being welcomed. And then when we rolled into Kuwait and then into Iraq was right when those contractors were killed and burned and hung from that bridge in Fallujah.
Yeah.
And then from that moment forward, it turned into something very different, and it turned into a combat mission. And, within the first day of us arriving, the first soldier got killed. A couple days later, more soldiers got killed. And then it just, from there on for the next year, it turned into a complete combat mission that they were not trained for. We were actually the first people to document and film the lack of armor. We were with engineers at the time, and so when they found out that they were rolling into a combat zone without up armored, like they had no armor on these antiquated old equipment that they brought from the National Guard Armory in Arkansas. They brought those to Kuwait. And so they started welding any pieces of metal that they could to up armor these things. And so that we were the first people to document that.
Well, that was a very controversial time because you had, there was a lot of Pentagon press reporters asking about those events and those things, and that was when Rumsfeld was saying, "Hey, you go to the army, you go to war with the army that you have, not the army that you want." And I remember even from Afghanistan, we were at the first stages of Afghanistan, we were running around Afghanistan in Humvees that were cargo Humvees, not armored at all. So it became like an international story, both in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I think that, it was insane rolling around because
Yeah.
that's when they started employing roadside bombs and, tying daisy chaining, giant artillery rounds together to try to hit as many vehicles in a convoy at once as possible. And you guys were in and around, I was as well, but you guys were in and around that with the National Guard unit, which must have been uh, both interesting as a filmmaker, but also quite insane.
It was, yeah. And I mean, I can remember the soldiers asking us while we were still there. They would say, "You guys can go home at any time. Why are you here?" And then sometimes we would go back and forth because we were also covering the families of the National Guard at the same time. So we would tag team, and if something happened, one of us would get back to Arkansas. And I remember every time we were coming back, as we got closer to these guys, they would be like, "Hey, we just lost so and so. I don't know if you should be coming back." And I mean, they really were trying to look out for us, but we stuck it out and just kept going out with them day after day while we were there.
Yeah. And that was so just for anybody who wants to go back and look at that, just give them the name of that series again.
It was called Off to War,
Yeah.
for the Discovery Times channel.
And you guys really started
And
piling in. Go ahead.
well, you'll see clips of it in the film about Brent and Armed Only with the Camera. One of the worst ambushes we were in, is it was actually my 30th birthday that night, but we got pinned down and a bunch of RPGs, and that's in the film. You'll see it in Armed Only with the Camera.
There was a lot of people in here commenting on it already that they saw it and they thought it was so good, very moving. I see that from Mary Jo, who follows us and experienced every emotion. Um, what else? Another person down here.
Somebody,
Gee,
somebody
yeah,
lost a cousin in Iraq. I'm sorry to
yeah,
hear that.
yeah. Um, you guys both started piling on the accolades at that point, and you were a hothead. And was it easier to make films and get films after that, or was it just as slog it is today?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit of both. I mean, it was never easy, and I think what we learned to do from John and what we continued doing out of necessity was we taught ourselves to do everything so that we didn't have to hire a crew, so that we could go out and get films off the ground without needing a lot of money. So, I mean, we would jump into places with just enough money to pay for the plane ticket to get down there.
Yeah,
And then we started doing. The New York Times had just launched their video department at the time, and they needed content. And so, we started doing stories for them, breaking news stories in places like, Mexico with the height of the cartel killings in Juarez, and then also in Haiti with the earthquake. So we would do breaking news stories for them that would come out the next day on the front page of the Times. But then that allowed us to stay down there, make contacts, and then turn those into larger documentaries, which we did for both of those places.
and I think a lot of people don't understand. Like, there's a lot of different ways to acquire money when you're trying to make a film. They did it the most difficult way, which is they
That's
got
true.
little bits at a time and hoping they were going to continue to get more little bits at a time, the more they were able to show people what they were doing. And that's really risky because you could end up with, you could make a film, but if you can't see the beginning, middle, and end, it's difficult. And you need that money to shoot. And I imagine a lot of those times, as a freelance film company, you are trying to figure out, like, are you going to have enough to even, it's not even about that point about paying yourselves. At that point, it's just about making sure you have plane fare and money to eat and hotels to stay in. You don't even, at that point, you're not acquiring any cash in your bank account. You're spending everything under the risk.
Yeah, and we were
And
editors. We were editors. I mean, that's a lot of the way we
good.
made money editing a lot of times. We would support ourselves by editing, a week at a time here, 2 weeks at a time there, accumulate a little bit money, and then spend that to go try to develop our own projects.
Yeah. Now I want to get to the film itself. I want you to sort of walk me through. I want you to walk through our listeners on the events of the day your brother died. Why was he there? What was he chasing? What do you remember about those first?
So we had been working on a project about refugees all over the world, and we were pretty much done with it. And and the war in Ukraine broke out, and I remember having a conversation with Brent. You know, we should probably cover this because it is the biggest refugee crisis at the time. And so, he was just. I'm sorry about that. Just
That's okay. Listen, my followers here are used to George and Dixie jumping in and out and barking, and so this is yet another dog story.
This is Cooper, everybody. um, so we honestly we underestimated the danger of it. We had been to so many war zones that we felt like, okay, he'll go for a week. He'll you know, find somebody coming out of Ukraine into Poland, and then just Brent being Brent. Once he got into Ukraine, I mean, this working with Brent. I mean, he just
No
kept
stop.
pushing further and further in, because we would talk every day and check in with each other, and he's just like, I need to find that perfect family that I want to follow, because that was always the approach, is try to find people that are living through this, because our way of filming is to do it in real time, not to interview people after the fact. We want to be following them on the ground as it's happening. So him and Juan, day after day, just kept pushing closer to the capital, and at the same time, the Russian soldiers were bombing and surrounding the city.
What was let me interrupt you and back up a little bit. Do you remember the talking to him the day of or the day before, and what was that conversation like?
Oh yeah, multiple times a day. We were always checking in with each other. And I remember, so he was scheduled to leave on a Thursday, and he kept pushing the plane ticket back. He kept asking me to extend it another day, and I just kept, and then I was following the news and seeing that it was getting a lot more dangerous than it when he landed on the ground there. So I started getting a little concerned and just saying, "Are you sure you don't have enough? Maybe it's time to come home." And he just pushed it back day after day after day, and then he died on a Sunday. Um,
I
and
think
so
most people don't understand that when you're filming, if you're a newspaper reporter or a magazine reporter, you can interview people all over the place and really create a great picture, a great scene of what's happening. But when you're making a film or you're doing a story for television, you have to be close to things. And I think that you have to be, if you're just interviewing refugees on the Polish border, it's not going to be nearly as interesting. If you're interviewing somebody in a town inside of Ukraine, but far enough away from the action, you don't see or hear anything, you're still with the same situation. And I think that most people don't understand that you can be 100, 200 meters away from fighting and feel like you are on another planet, so far away that nothing matters and you're not getting any of the atmosphere or anything that matters. And that's why the people who do this work, like Brett and Craig and myself, you're always pushing to get closer and you're trying to calculate the risk. And even with a lot of experience, the risk still carries things that you can't see, feel, or hear.
Yeah.
And so, anyways, I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, so it was. I got a text from Brent, probably, if I had to guess, maybe 4 a.m. my time here on Sunday morning. And he said, "I've arrived to the front lines in Irpin," and I just simply said, "Please be careful." Um, fell back asleep, and then, I don't know how much longer later, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour, my phone rings, and it's Juan calling me on WhatsApp. It's not Brent. And I just remember immediately thinking, this is not good. Why is Juan calling me? Um, and the second I answered, Juan was yelling into the phone, "We've been shot." And from that moment is, you just went into, I just remember being very calm, almost, like an outside of the body type of experience, but you just go back into almost as if I'm right there on the ground. You just become calm, like we always are in these situations, and just trying to figure out what exactly had happened. And I just remember asking Juan, did he have his vest on? And he said yes. And I said, was he shot in the vest or the face? And Juan paused and he didn't answer. And at that point, I just knew I didn't even need confirmation, you know.
And Juan was very, very seriously injured. Um, Juan was my student at Columbia, and he had something that they called a penetrating. Well, we'll just call it a penetrating butt wound, but it was in a tough spot. And even having these conversations at that point, he was in and out. He was in really bad shape, in a place where the hospitals were less than ideal, and having to deal with that. And and then Juan at that point, I can't remember. I've had so many conversations about it when he actually had found out that he was gone. I think they didn't tell him when he was in the
No,
hospital.
I told him when he came out of surgeries. I mean, you know, it was a very long day. Juan went into surgeries. I didn't hear from him for a long time, and I was, you know, getting confirmation from people on the ground, and then eventually Juan, when he came out of surgeries, I told him.
Yeah,
And then and then I got on a plane as fast as I could to get over there because it was obvious if I didn't go over there, we weren't going to get him or Juan out. You know, and Jeff helped me deal with trying to get Juan out because we were trying to juggle multiple things. I mean, how do we get to Brent and make sure we can bring him home to the family? But we've got Juan injured in a hospital that's being bombed at that moment, you know, going through surgeries while they're bombing the hospital.
yeah. I
Um,
remember Christoph calling me from the hospital and saying, "All the nurses and doctors are leaving. You know, what does that mean?" And I said, "Well, what can you hear? What are you hearing around you?" And he had to go through that whole description and everything. And I said, "I think you're okay. Stay where you're at." And talking him through that. And Christoph's an experienced journalist himself and been in many dangerous places, but he was just one of those. The war was moving so quickly, and nobody knew they were bombing the airport, if I remember correctly. And that airport was close enough, but far enough away where it wasn't close enough to him. But obviously, when your doctors and nurses are leaving the hospital and the patients are laying there by themselves, it's concerning. So, tell me a little bit about um, when you really. I mean, when did you know that you had to make this film? I mean, you went over there instantly. Was it something that as soon as he was gone, you said to yourself, "This is what we have to do for him, for the film, for everything"?
yeah, it was
You remember
pretty
that moment?
immediate. Yeah, it was very immediate. And I mean, Brent and I had lots of conversations about what would we do if one of us were killed or kidnapped or detained, and it was always keep filming. So it was just instinctual. I knew exactly what Brent would have wanted me to do. You know, he would have wanted me to go get him, and he would have wanted me to film it. And I remember having conversations with my mom and my sister on the way over there, preparing them for that, and just making sure they understood what I planned to do and that they were okay with it. And I remember my mom bringing up Emmett Till's grandmother and talking about, you know, um, showing the body so that people understand violence, and that so we made a conscious decision that we weren't going to shy away from showing what had happened to him.
Do you think that, you know, um, I mean, a lot of people just won't really sort of understand how you had both the courage to be filming and making that film while simultaneously picking up the body of your dead brother. And I think that that's something that people who don't do this for a living won't understand. Can you explain that to them and how you juggled those two responsibilities? And was it a relief to you to be able to be working?
Yeah, I think it kept me grounded and sane because I think if I had gone over there without a camera, it would have been much harder. I think you learn to compartmentalize when you work in war zones, and often the only time I can ever remember being scared is on the way to a war zone. But once you step into those places, you get so hyper focused with the work that you're doing, the fear goes away. So I think for me, it helped me focus to be filming, and just thinking, okay, I have this very important thing to do, which is bring him home, but also to document this, and I felt just a very big responsibility to tell his story, and I did not want his death to be in vain, and so that kept me, surprisingly very grounded.
It's not easy to get to Ukraine from Little Rock, Arkansas. I imagine it's probably a 24-hour journey, given the fact you have to fly from Arkansas to someplace probably like Atlanta or New York, DC. I can't remember your way out. And then you're flying into wherever, and then you're flying into Warsaw or something, and then you're trying to get on either a train or a car to get across the border. Then you're across the border. Then from there, you're going to the hospital to see Juan. From there, you're then going to the place where it's not a simple thing. It's not just like getting on a plane and stepping off on the other end. And everybody's greeting you with signs, right? What were you thinking on the plane as you were going there? How were you processing it? Because you had to process this so quickly.
Yeah. Well, I was one leaning on people like you who have a lot of experience. I mean, I can remember you and I talking constantly. I remember talking to Ukrainian journalists on the ground. I mean, I will forever be indebted to the journalists in Ukraine. I mean, they are reporting on the war that's in their own country, and they dropped everything for an entire week to just help me get Brent and Juan out. They met us at the border. They walked us across the border. They had cars, waiting for us. And everybody just went to work,
Hmm.
you know.
What, when you got to Ukraine, what was going through your mind before you found Brent?
That moment, like, I think there was a lot of, anticipation about that particular moment, and seeing one, and I wasn't sure which was going to happen first because we were simultaneously trying to figure out where the meetup point to try to get to Brent was, and also the evacuation of one from one hospital to another, and then eventually back to the U.S. So it was more kind of, tempering my emotions of which is going to happen first. And I was expecting to go see Brent first, and it ended up happening the other way around. I ended up seeing Juan first in the hospital.
Yeah. And that must have been really difficult because that was the first time Juan was ever able to see any people who were close to him, for he'd been laying there for a couple days, in the hospital with certain surgeries to come even after he got home. Many, many surgeries. I can't even remember the number at this point, but, at Columbia University Hospital, he had to fly home on a special flight. But before that moment, he was seeing you and Christoph for the first time. And that must have been
Yeah.
extremely difficult. You see
Yeah,
that
it
in the
was
film.
difficult. Yeah, you do see it in the film. We filmed it, and I think the hardest part was just the survivor skill that one was going through. And so you're grieving the loss of your brother, but then you're trying to be strong for him because you can't imagine what he had just gone through, because he literally was there, with his hands on Brent's neck trying to save him. And so, really in that moment, I was just trying to reassure Juan that we were glad he was alive, because if he hadn't survived, we would have not known what had happened to Brent. Um,
I skipped.
and then from that,
Yeah, go ahead.
and then from that moment after that, when we left the hospital, we started, nailing down the time that we were going to be able to finally get to Brent. And then my focus shifted to, preparing to see him.
When you saw Juan for the first time, it would have been the first time he had an opportunity to tell you what went on. Exactly what happened. What did he tell you? And had you knew that he'd been shot, but he must have walked you through that. What did he say about how the incident went down? What do you remember about that? Because I don't think we've told anybody here what happened.
Yeah. Well, and you hear a little bit of it when I see Juan at the hospital. He describes the moment of when it happened. Um, and then Juan actually went back at the 1 year anniversary to find out a lot more information because they managed to track down the driver who was driving the car. Um,
That they were
but
in.
that they were in. But it was an ambush by Russian soldiers. They Juan was in the back seat, and he saw out of the corner of his eyes, a soldier raising up an AK-47 and screamed out, "We're being shot!" And they just unloaded on him. And there seemed to be some snipers because the bullet that hit Brent went through a windshield from like a higher position and hit him in the neck. But so yeah, it was a barrage of a lot of different machine guns from different angles that ambushed the car.
And the driver saved Juan's life for sure by spinning that car around. They were on a bridge at the end of a bridge trying to go into the town where the refugees were starting to walk out because the fighting was so close. And they spun that car around on the bridge, and that driver got Juan out and your brother's body, or God knows what would have happened.
Yeah, and that's what the driver said to Juan when he went back, is he just said, because Juan asked, "Why did you turn the car back into the line of fire?" And he said, "Because we would have either been for sure killed or worse, detained, if we had gone forward and to where the Russians had taken control of that area." So he felt it was safer, and it's a split second decision under fire to turn the car around and drive them out of there. But when he turned around, it seems like that's when Brent took the sniper round.
Yeah. And it's, you have to make those decisions quickly. And when you see somebody raising a weapon to you, you're really not going to be able to just stop and get out. You're not going to want to be taken by those guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, um, so you remember after you left Juan, um, you had to go and find your brother. Where did you find him? What was his condition? What were you thinking? How were you working in that moment?
Um, I mean, it was interesting. Some of the journalists that were helping us spoke multiple languages. And I mean, these are things that don't make it into a film. You'd have to write a book about it. But the complexities of even trying to get Brent's body out of the war, because there's places being bombed, there's bridges down, there's, some drivers said they were going to bring him, and then they changed their mind because it was too dangerous. So this was going on for a while.
He was still deep in the war zone at that point when they took him
Yeah,
to a place, and you had to go into the place, into the area very close to where he was shot and killed to go
yeah,
retrieve his body. You and Christoph did.
yeah. So yeah, just trying to navigate all of that. But yeah, in the back of my mind, knowing we're getting closer and closer to the moment that I was dreading the most, which was going to see him.
And what do you remember about that?
Um, yeah, I think again, I used the filmmaking part of me to steady myself. I think I treated it like this is any other really messed up moment that I have captured in all these places, and just tried to not get too much in my head about the fact that it was my brother.
And you're looking through a camera lens too at that point. Talk to people a little bit about how that's an insulating factor, as much as
Yeah,
you can, what you were dealing with.
yeah. I mean, I can remember, like the ambush that I was talking about on my 30th birthday, where pretty sure I was going to die in that ambush, and just hyper focusing on the thing that says REC record, and making sure the numbers are turning, because you're thinking, I don't want to be survived this and forgotten to have pressed record. So the things that you focus on to keep yourself calm are little details like that. And so it was the same thing with this. I'm focused on, am I in focus? Am I, you know, am I getting the right angles? And I just remember I wanted to be really methodical about it. I wanted to treat Brent's death as a war crime, and I wanted to document it in a way that it could never be argued that he was assassinated for being a journalist.
Yeah. I think, most people, what you said really rings true with a lot of people who do this for a living. I remember people would say to me, "Aren't you scared when you're in those places?" And I'm like, "Yeah, fuck yeah, I'm scared. I'm scared all the fucking time." But for one, you're around soldiers a lot of times, or you're around people who are not nice to you. So you really can't show a lot of that. And secondly, I would always explain to people, like, they would say, "Well, how did you capture this in this moment?" And I said, I had a great fear. And my fear was generally not being shot at. That was part of it. But the big fear was not recording it,
Yeah.
because I knew that if I didn't record it, I missed that moment and I'd have to stay longer.
Yep.
It's one of those things where you're like, yeah, I could be here 5 days or I could be here 20. And if I
Yeah.
screw up the first 5 days, I might be here 20. And so you're hyper focused at that moment to make sure you're capturing stuff while you're also trying to pay attention to things going on around you so you're not going to get killed. And it becomes something that is second nature. And we had a long in our second episode of our podcast last week, we talked about post traumatic stress. And I know it's something that we all sort of deal with. And the post-traumatic stress of those events doesn't hit you in that moment. It hits you
Yeah.
a long time after. In that moment, you're just scared you're not going to do your job. I mean, especially at working at 60 Minutes, if you didn't capture something like that and you put your crew at risk staying longer. And oftentimes we're working with like myself and another cameraman and my correspondent. And you would think to yourself, if I miss this, am I going to get fired? Am
Yeah.
I going to like, is my boss at 60 Minutes going to say, you don't belong there? His favorite phrase sometimes was like, pat you on the back and look at you and smile and say, sometimes some people just weren't meant to work at this level. And that's like in the back of your mind all the time. Right.
No, I
And
mean, when we were doing Off to War, we committed to 10 hours of television. That's a lot of television. And I think a lot of people don't understand what the being embedded with soldiers is. You're embedded with that group. They might sit around for weeks at a
90%
time
of
with
the
not
time.
much, yeah, with not much happening. And then the 10% of the time you're trying to stay alive, So you felt incredible pressure to be in those moments and capture those moments.
And you're spending that time, that downtime, trying to capture things that will fit in later, but knowing
Yeah,
that without that other 10%, you don't have much. And
right.
also knowing that while you're spending that 90% of the time doing nothing or not doing the interesting, exciting things per se, you're burning through money. Like
Yeah.
we had that situation in Somalia on the series we worked on together, where Brent and I were in Somalia and you were trying to talk us off ledges every day because we were spending days trying to get out and film something for one day. And
Yeah.
that's a part of the process that most people don't understand. But you can spend a tremendous amount of money doing zero on the ground in a place that is both dangerous and mind numbingly crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you could just be burning through cash, with the security teams that you have or the hotels that you're spending on a crew. Or, you remember Somalia, we were taking convoys to and from the airport, which was 200 meters. And we'd have to get a 20-person convoy to take us to the
That's
airport
right.
200 meters away. And you remember our editor that one time we were out on assignment and we came
That's
back
right.
and like,
Ruben, yeah.
tell that story. Tell that story. We'll get back to this.
Well, I mean, he didn't realize what it was going to cost to go get some snacks, and that ends up being thousands and thousands of dollars of a security bill to just go
It was
down the
like
road and
10
get
grand.
snacks.
He
Yeah.
thought he was going to surprise us. We came back from we were in another part of Somalia where it was absolutely insane. And, and he went to the airport with a security team to get some, some cookies and chips and like soft drinks for us. So when we arrived, he could surprise us. And we,
Right.
we asked him when we came in, like, how did you get this? And he said, oh, I went to the airport. And we're like, how did you go to the airport? He said, well, I just had the convoy take me. And we were like, are you
That's
out of
right.
your fucking mind? You know how much these cookies cost? Like
That's right.
$10,000. But
That's right. Literally $10,000. Yeah.
it was like 10 grand. Uh, well, okay. So here we
Yeah.
are. We're
Well,
in.
just one more thing on that story. I mean, I can remember in Iraq, we figured, I mean, there were so many firefights we would miss because we weren't rolling, because you're driving around in these Humvees for 12 hours a day, nothing's happening. And, if you don't hit record at the right time, so eventually we made the decision, we
You
can
just
never
record
not be
everything.
filming. We got to record all 12 hours of the day.
That's what I
And,
would do. My,
and
my, my
yeah,
editors at 60 Minutes would fucking nuts because they'd have to
yeah,
go through 10 hours of a Humvee rolling through the Hindu Kush to see a 2-minute incident.
yeah. But when you watch Armed Only with the Camera and you see the part in Iraq where we're ambushed, we captured every bit of it. We captured the whole lead up to it. We captured the Iraqi police who drive past us and flip on their lights to mark us, because at this time they had just handed authority back over to the Iraqi police and National Guard. And I remember the Arkansas Guard soldiers were terrified because they were like, we don't trust that they're not going to set us up. And sure enough, less than a week into it, you can see it because we filmed all of it. You see the lights flip on and then the RPGs start, but
And
we
had you
captured
not been
every,
rolling, you would have missed that whole beginning of that scene.
yeah.
And you
And
just would
then
have
you
had
can't
bang, bang,
explain
bang, and
this.
it would have been over.
Yeah.
So you have to roll on all that stuff under the auspices that you might get 2 minutes of something great, or you might go on a mission all night long and come back and have absolutely nothing but burn up tape or
Yeah.
cards that are full. And, you know, you were lucky because you guys were editing, but we would go back to New York. I remember one time I had 29 hours to get a 4 minute firefight in the Afghan Pakistan border. And 4 minutes, people don't think that that seems like a long time, but when you're getting shot at, it is a very, very fucking long time.
Yeah.
And you've worked for all that, and they're literally complaining to your bosses because all they shot is Humvee stuff,
Yeah.
and you're like, you didn't get there yet, you know. Uh,
Yeah.
tell me a little bit about after you're leaving the country. Obviously, this is a huge international incident. You know, while you guys were over there, you know, we were talking on behalf of the family and you to the media. It was a huge international story, and you're leaving the country and you're coming home. Talk to me about that flight home. From everything from you leaving the country and what that felt like to get him out of Ukraine, and then going through Atlanta, which I know is a special time, and then arriving back in Little Rock.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you watch the film, you get to see all these moments, but, you know, crossing the border into Poland out of Ukraine was, you know, a huge sigh of relief. You know, because I wasn't confident that we were gonna get him out, you know, and so just the fact that we were able to actually get him out and start our journey back home was a huge relief. You know, and other moments that don't make it into the film, you know, just even that night when we stopped in Warsaw, I had to drop his body off at a morgue, you know, and just the thought of, okay, I'm going to leave my brother in this refrigerator for the night while I go to my hotel and sleep. Um, you know, and I actually remember talking to you that night, and you encouraging me to keep filming. But I can remember, you know, opening his bag for the first time in the hotel that night, not really thinking about it, and start looking through his bag, and just, you know, a waft of Brent's dirty clothes, and, you know, the smell of your brother. I mean, those kind of moments are stuff that you can't explain in a film, because you know, you just don't expect to get hit by the smell of your brother after it is gone, you know.
Yeah. And then you flew through Atlanta, and they had a special thing going on for you
Yeah,
there.
and then we flew through Atlanta, and all these veterans, you know, who you often see volunteering at the airports, you know, gave him a hero's salute, when they loaded him on the plane, and then the pilot announced to everybody that, you know, we were carrying, you know, Brent Renaud home, and so every leg of that trip, you know, he was treated like a hero, and then by the time we got back to Little Rock, and all the guys that we had embedded with for a year in Iraq, and, you know, DEA that we had filmed with in Arkansas when we did Meth Storm. I mean, all these guys that we, you know, we'd filmed with. We had one of our security guys drive 18 hours through the night from Juarez to make sure he was there. And, you know, so we landed, and there is, you know, as if the head of state had just died, was a huge military procession, you know, waiting for him to take him to
Well,
the funeral.
you before that, they had a moment for a couple of us and your family, and they emptied a hangar at Little Rock Airport
Yeah.
for him. And that was, you know, and I remember he was draped in the American flag, and I remember seeing you getting out of the car and hugging you, and then, you know, you went right back to work.
Yeah.
And that was with your mom and your sister there, and his longtime ex-girlfriend and his current girlfriend, and all those people that mattered to him in that hangar.
Yeah. I'm just plugging my phone in so I don't lose my battery here. Yeah, it was, yeah, and again, I think that the camera at that moment really helped me, because, and even at the funeral, I mean, I just kept filming. It was a way to not have to talk to people. It was a way to keep focused on just getting through that and making sure I was documenting every bit of it. And I didn't even have to ask. I mean, we have so many filmmakers who showed up to the funeral. I didn't have to ask. I had the funeral covered from 5 different angles, because
Yeah,
everybody showed up with their cameras.
handing that camera off to people too.
Yeah,
I think at some point you handed it off to me to film you when you were talking about your brother.
yeah,
But the procession was something that I've never seen before. It seemed like a presidential procession. There was at least 100 police cars,
yeah,
and took up the entire highway with blue flashing lights all the way from Little Rock Airport all the way to the funeral home.
Yeah.
What,
And I would also note this is happening in a time where journalists are constantly being criticized. And so these are guys who loved Brent because, he embedded with them for a year at a time, and they trusted him. And so to me, that was not lost on me that you have police officers and soldiers and, all these people honoring him just felt really special and unique.
and you had a big church funeral. A lot of people showed up. Brent was Buddhist, and you got a lot of Buddhist in you, but your family came together. Um, I mean, how do you put an end on that moment in terms of your thinking about that day? What do you remember the most about it? Having to talk about your brother for that time in front of all those people that have spent all their life with him.
I think just the love that we had, with that procession. And I mean, you couldn't stand in that funeral home. And so just the support that we had from the community was incredible. And I think those are the things out of tragedy that, that are silver linings of, and seeing what Brent meant to people. And that has continued for the last 3.5 years. I mean, when we started screening this film, every single night was sold out with journalists after journalists showing up to pay their respects.
Did you go to work immediately on it right after, or did you take some time?
Pretty immediately. Yeah. I really didn't know what else to do with myself, to be honest. And, that's what got me out of bed every day.
Yeah. I remember when I took my little fun motorcycle journey down to to Austin, and I saw the first version of that. And we tinkered around with the script and what to put in and what to leave out. And it was a longer version at the time. We were thinking about doing a feature film. What made you and HBO? Well, first of all, why did you partner with HBO? Just it's a big deal to be on HBO, but it's a time also where people weren't buying a lot of films anymore.
Yeah.
Much harder to sell a film than it was 10 years ago when you guys were, 15 years ago when you guys were making your first stuff with him.
Yeah. I mean, well, and that's, unlike a lot of places, there are still many people at HBO that we worked with when we first started doing Dope Sick Love. And so they were devastated by the loss of Brent. And so I called Lisa Heller, one of our executive producers at HBO, when I got back, and I said, I filmed the whole thing, and I think I have a story, and I'd like to come show it to you. And she said, take time to heal, and when you're ready, come see us. And we just stayed in touch until we were ready to show them some footage.
And I think it was about an hour 15, that first long version of it, somewhere in that neighborhood that we watched. HBO was like, we want to make a run with this, and we think it's better at 30 to 40 minutes, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it was a tough decision. I mean, I didn't want to just make that decision without feeling like I hadn't looked through all the footage. And I mean, when I say look through all the footage, just the story we were telling about Iraq. I mean, imagine our archives. I mean, thousands and thousands of hours of footage from all these different countries that we've went through.
Yeah. And there was a lot of other producers that were giving you photos and footage and all that kind of stuff too.
Yeah,
And you
like
had to go
you.
through all that stuff like it was fresh.
Yeah. So, but it became clear, the more we had that narrative thread of the story of me coming back, and that started to come together, the longer the film would get, that narrative thread would fall apart. And so there was a balancing act of finding the best moments of our careers in these war zones to flash back to, but you couldn't stay in that flashback too long, or you would forget about the story bringing him home. And so that's kind of where we found the balance in that length of 38 minutes, which puts it right at a short documentary, was where we landed. And if you watch the film in a theater right now, you'll feel like you've sat through 2 hours of a film because it's so heavy in 38 minutes. So
I mean,
I think that was the right length.
Yeah, that's it, 38. And when we were down in Austin for South by Southwest, for a lot of you guys that do or don't know South by Southwest, it's one of the world's great renowned entertainment festivals. It has a component that is a music part and a component that's a film part and a tech part now. And it's attended by, I don't know, I think the last number I heard was like 200,000 people are in town for that event. So it's not your average film festival. It's massive. And to be able to, and you know, HBO makes a decision to go, hey, we're going to try this as a short. We want it to be able to have all the accolades we think it's worth, which includes the idea of making an Oscar run, which seems so, um, you know, when you think about that, when you're making the film, you can't really think about it. You just have to make the best film you can. But that's what their expectation and thought process is. Maybe we can make a run with this. And which an incredible, not only honor to you, but Renaud Brothers Film and your brother, because, you know, he shot a lot of that stuff that we saw. And I think that, you know, when you think about that long ago, which last March or whatever, and it wins the audience award for that category at South by Southwest, you start kind of believing that maybe it's got something to it. You know, it's not just me thinking that because it's my brother and I made a film about him, right?
Yeah.
Did you were you ever in your mind thinking, you know, this will get the recognition that we want it to?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to explain. I sort of felt like from the moment Brent died that it was just meant to be, you know, so there was this inertia that was just pulling me through every step of this process, you know, and I could hear Brent clearly during the entire edit. So it was just day after day, put one foot in front of the other and get to the next step of each process of finishing the film. Um, you know, so yeah, but I wasn't surprised because of, you know, I feel like Brent was the hardest working documentary filmmaker any of us have ever known. And so I feel like he had been preparing for this. I mean, he used to talk about that he thought he would die young, and I never knew why he would say that. He would say that I think somehow he had this inner intuition that this was going to happen. And I think that's why he made such a big body of work. And so as the film was coming out and we started screening it, it all just felt like every bit of this was meant to be. It was all supposed to happen. We were supposed to make a film about it, and he was supposed to be honored at a time when, you know, all these journalists have a target on their back, and a time when it's the most dangerous time for journalists. So Brent's story has now become much bigger than just a story about my brother. It's a story about journalism under attack.
So now we have this film, right? And it makes the short list to the Oscars, which in and of itself is, in my opinion, a career accomplishment. And then this last week, when I think it was maybe a week or two ago, and I remember calling you in the morning saying, "Hey, fucker, why didn't you call me and tell me?" And you said you didn't watch the ceremony in the morning. You got a call from a friend in LA, right?
Yeah, well, I'm very superstitious, and so I did not wanna go look, and I just went about my morning waiting, hoping that my phone would start blowing up at some point, and it finally did.
How does it feel trying to? There's two things going on here. One, you're celebrating the life of your brother in the most profound, honoring way that you can imagine possible. The other, which I think the further you get away from his death, the easier it is to do that, which is, you know, celebrating the accomplishment of the film itself and where the film is going. I mean, here you have a film right now that is one of the top five, you know, short documentaries in the country this year. And there's thousands, I mean, of documentaries that are made every year. I mean, my students at Columbia made 8 alone just at the Columbia J School every year. And here you are with our film in the last 5. How difficult is it celebrating this accomplishment without him here?
Um, yeah, I mean, I feel like he is here, you know? I mean, I think, you know, I heard somebody say this recently that, you know, there's 2 deaths of a person when they physically die and the last time somebody says their name. You know, so I feel like as long as his name is being spoken, and, you know, his name is in this film, then, you know, that feels really healing and good to me that it's had this kind of impact. And, you know, getting the nomination for something like this, you know, is not about a career moment. It's really about, you know, a Brett moment of solidifying and immortalizing him in history.
Well, it's important, I think, for you that you had him as a co-director on the film posthumously. But I think it's also important to note that it's not just a posthumous honor because there's so much in the film that he shot himself.
Yeah, absolutely.
What
Yeah,
do you, what do you,
I know. He filmed for an entire week before I recovered, and kept telling the story from that point.
that's
You'll
in the
see
film itself?
you'll see him filming with Ukrainians, elderly Ukrainians whose entire house was just destroyed, and that was the last thing he did.
The one thing we haven't spoken about, which oftentimes gets spoken about when we're at these screenings, is the focus of him as a war journalist was not really, that as a person who was trying to cover the war so much as covering the people in between.
Yeah. Yeah, it was never about just rushing to the front lines. I mean, he was willing to do that. As you know, in times we would throw
Yes, I know. I know.
when you threw out your back in Mosul, and Brent had to go to the front lines for you, but it was always about the people caught in the middle. And that was the heart of his storytelling. It wasn't just about capturing the firefights. It was really about having people relate to people that were stuck in these conflicts.
Yeah, this you mentioned that. I'll just kind of tell it to people so it's not inside baseball. We were in East Mosul at the time when the Iraqi military and U.S., well, for lack of a better term, U.S. special operations mostly, and some conventional troops were fighting ISIS. And this was the big push in the east of Mosul. And Brent was with me for National Geographic. And we had gone one day to the front lines, and we were about 150 yards away from where we wanted to be. And every time we crossed the road, they would shoot at us. And it just didn't feel like we were going to be able to do 7 zigzags down the road. And the bigger problem was that all the houses that you could get to the front line on had these holes through the back walls. And I don't like going through those choke points because you can tripwire or step on a pressure plate and kill everybody, including yourself, blow your legs off. So I'd rather run back and forth down the street and get to the front line than go through these back alley kind of holes in the wall. And I remember Brent and I talking about it because he was like, let's go. And I'm like, no, let's wait. And then even from there, we had to get back to a safe area. So we still had to cross some roads where they would shoot at us going across the roads. And I remember we were running across this road, and you know how they have those in Iraq at those compounds where the cars come in and out, they have that sort of marble, that really slick marble.
Mhm.
And so I popped around the corner as we heard kind of like ping, ping. And as I jumped around the corner, my foot hit the marble and I slipped. And with my flak vest on, and I threw my back out completely. I couldn't get up. I couldn't move. I couldn't do anything. We eventually got me back in our armored vehicle and got us back about a mile behind us, which is where we were staying, a mile behind the front lines, which is a really safe area. Even when they're mortaring you or there's car bombs all around, it's still much safer than being on a front line. And so they got me back there, and we were sleeping in this elementary school with the Iraqi military and the U.S. Military. And so we had this big room, and there was about 4 or 5 of us in there. And Steven, who was our other cameraman, we would keep him in the drone room, shooting all the drone stuff and and the commanders making decisions. And me and Brent would go to the front line and shoot stuff. Well, anyways, I couldn't go anymore. And there was no way to get me any medication that I needed because we were in one of those kind of places. We'd had to go back to Erbil, and it would have been days, 5 to 7 days to go out 100 miles and back because of all the rigmarole. We'll just say it, like red tape. And, so I chose to stay, but I couldn't move at all. And there were no beds. We were sleeping on the ground. And I remember Brent saying, like, and I said to him, I said, like, how are we going to do this? Maybe we have to go out and regroup or something. He's like, no, we'll just go shoot it tomorrow without you. So here he was, and that particular day he went out, and it was him and our security guy, Dane, former British SAS guy who was 60 something years old and looked like he was a prima ballerina in such great shape. He could put his head between his knees when he was doing toe touches. He was like 60 something years old. It was unbelievable, but he was incredible shape. And they went out there and shot that one scene in Chain of Command where, they're shooting at these refugees. And of course, that's Brent covering the refugees. It wasn't the war per se, but these refugees were caught in the middle of that conflict, and they were
Yeah.
trying to get to safety. and Brent shoots the best scene of the whole episode, of these refugees running and then getting shot at, and you see the rounds going off the wall next to these refugees' heads, and they turn around and they run back. What most people don't think about is that Brent was there shooting that.
Yeah.
While they turned and ran back, he was standing there making sure it was in focus and running back. It was an incredible scene if you ever go back and watch Chain of Command, and I think it's the first or second episode. And
Yeah.
it was the most incredible thing. And everybody's like, in New York, it was like, Jeff, that was fucking amazing. It's like calling me saying what a great scene it was, looking at the dailies and stuff. And I was like, yeah, it was really great. Yeah. And the whole time I was laying on my back trying to stuff as many Tylenol down my throat as I could. So
Yeah.
that's the kind of person he was. He didn't um, want to miss those moments. And there's pictures I have, which you have all those pictures now, of just looking at Brett, and he had that kind of funky hair from not caring. And he'd wake
Yeah.
up in the morning and look completely exhausted from, you know, 20 hours from the day before. He's had 4 hours, but he got up before everybody else that day because he wanted to shoot the sunrise on the top of
Yeah.
this hill, and uh, just a nonstop workhorse. Unbelievable. I couldn't
It
believe
was.
what it was like when he was working. He was so zoned in. What do you want them to remember most about your brother?
Just all these stories, but mainly that he cared. He really did truly care, and I think we captured that in the film, and that's why we went and dug through thousands of hours of footage to look for his voice, which wasn't easy because we're not in our films, and so it was hard to go find that stuff. But I think the moment in the film that's my favorite is the wounded man in Somalia who is laying there with his skin burned off of his body, and he notices Brent's compassion from across the room and calls him over, and they have that moment together. To me, that was Brent. He really, really cared about the people he was filming. He really thought he could make a difference with his camera, and to him, it was worth risking his life and worth dying. And so that's what I hope people understand. And I hope that every time people hear journalism, dragged through the mud, and journalists dragged through the mud, especially journalists that go and cover these conflicts, that people understand that they are literally, dying to bring people the truth.
Well, that's true. And I'll say one thing, and I'm not going to ask you to comment on it, but I remember Pete Hegseth in the White House a couple months ago, um, and they were talking about combat operations and asking him questions, and he criticized the journalists in the room, saying, "That's the thing you guys don't understand about the fog of war, because you've never been in these kind of places before." And I almost came through the fucking TV set at him, because I remember, losing one of my best friends, in Brent, and then just a few years before that, losing Chris Hondros, who was one of my best friends and my roommate. And I don't think people understand, like, when he's sitting there tearing down the press corps, maybe the Washington press corps don't see conflict zones as much, but many of them have covered those places before. And they ended up in the White House because they were done doing it after 10 years. And it's just the most insulting thing when the President of the United States or the Secretary of Defense starts criticizing people because they don't think that they understand what the fog of war is and how difficult covering conflicts is. I can tell you, I've been shot, and I've been in roadside bomb incidents where the guy next to me lost his legs. I've had members of my team kidnapped. And again, I lost one of my best friends in Brent and Chris. It's one of those things that, and by the way, I always tell people, we don't get combat pay. And I'm not suggesting that the US Army and those guys that do get combat pay shouldn't get it. They absolutely should, because it's fucking nuts. But the companies we work for, they think it's a big privilege to send you there, and they oftentimes don't understand the value of that person they're sending, because nowadays they'll send lots of people and that's how people get injured in those places, because they send people who are maybe not qualified. The reason that Brent lived to 50 years old, you know, um, is because, and he covered it from the time he was 24 years old, is because he gained a lot of that experience over time. The amount of places you guys went and worked, the amount of
Yeah.
places that I've went and worked, it's a tremendous amount of hours in places where it's very dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Um,
I mean, we all survived a lot of things we shouldn't have.
yeah, I'd like to maybe just open up. There's some good comments I've been noticing while you were talking, and I want to maybe just go through some of them. And some of those might be questions. So I'm going to go back over and take a look at some of those, and just pose a few of them with you if you have time.
Mhm.
Um, yeah. Uh, let's see. Let's see. La, 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 la.
Someone wrote a question early on.
Question for Craig. The question for you is: do you still go out in the field, or are you more involved in the production side of the films now?
Well, yeah, I mean, I, when I went to get Brent in Ukraine, that from that point, it was a 3-year edit of the which I've just finished, so it was, and a lot of times the editing does take up, that's kind of the ratio. You might spend sometimes a month or 2 months or 3 months filming, and then you're in the edit room for years at a time. But we were always juggling multiple projects. I've been working on a PBS series called Southern Storytellers while making this film. And so after Brent was killed, I had deadlines for the first season of that. So while I was editing this film, I was going out and filming and editing and finishing a series, a 3-part episode for PBS. And then that came out last summer. And now I'm shooting a second episode of that right now.
Well, and
Well,
not only that, you were literally in Atlanta, I think, a couple days ago shooting, right?
I was on a plane this morning we were in Alabama shooting yesterday. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Did I talk to you? The days are running together. I think I talked to you after you got back from that or something.
Yeah, it was this morning. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's
But yeah,
see.
I'm still in the field. Mm-hmm.
Um, there's just a lot of really positive comments on here. If you guys haven't seen the film, I really love for you guys to go do that and watch it on HBO Max. I think it's the kind of thing that will give you a real appreciation for the kind of people that go to war zones and do the kind of work that Brent and Craig have done. A lot of people just saying thanking you for sharing about your brother, and sorry for your loss. Let's see.
I see somebody asking, how does grief affect your work?
Yeah.
I mean, I think grief was part of the work for this. I mean, all of us, everybody that worked on this film, and who's credited in this film was grieving throughout the process of making this film. And so, I think when you watch this, you can probably feel it. This was truly a tribute. And the grief was part of the journey. It's what got us out of bed every day. It's what kept us motivated to dig through, thousands of hours of footage for the needle in a haystack of those moments that would bring Brent's compassion to life. And so, and I think grief is not linear. You have some days where you feel like you've really healed 3 years later, and other days you feel like you're a year or two into it. So I think it's still unwinding for me. I think having the film out in the world now and being recognized like this is a big milestone. I've noticed that just in the last, just since the announcement, I feel myself relaxing more than I have in 3.5 years.
Um, One question from Deb, who literally I talked to an hour before this conversation that you and I are having. How has carrying this film into public spaces changed the way you grieve, or hasn't it? Deb worked for a long time for National Geographic as well herself. Tell me a little bit about how it's, taking it out in the public. Has it changed the way you grieve? Does it have to do with, you have to be more careful in your mind, a little guarded?
It really depends. It really depends on the evening. And, Juan and I have stopped watching the film in real time in theaters because we made that mistake. We both did, where, I mean, I was sitting with Juan at a screening in Los Angeles, and he decided to watch the film, and he fully went into flashback mode, and I had to walk him out of the theater, and so we've stopped doing that. And it's hard to sit in the theater and relive it and process it and then get up on stage and talk about it. So I tend to not watch it, but I will pop in and out to watch enough of it to put myself in the mindset that everybody is in the theater, because I have to remember they're seeing it for the first time, and it's pretty graphic, especially for people that have not experienced war. It's pretty heavy. So, but yeah, I mean, sometimes it's difficult. I mean, you talk about PTSD. I mean, there's times where I find myself, you know, getting dizzy, where I have to steady myself. I've gotten to where I ask for chairs when we do Q&As, because if I'm standing there, I'm afraid I'm going to end up on my face if I talk about it for too long. So you just have to kind of guard yourself and your energy. And mingling after the film for too long can be problematic. So I just try to think about all that stuff and stay grounded.
What do you, actually, you have a question from Deborah who wonders, do you dream a lot about your brother?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do. And sometimes I have kind of a recurring dream where he's not quite sure what happened and I'm explaining to him what happened. And so that, that happens. But yeah, I would say I still dream about him quite a bit.
You're a pretty spiritual person. I know that. And so is Brent. And in your house, I hope you don't mind me sharing this. There's like a little memorial to your brother, sort of like a little Buddhist memorial off in the corner.
Yeah.
Do you see him every day there? What's your routine?
Hold on, I'm gonna ask my son. I'm gonna let my son finish here for a second. Thanks, Tom. Um, yeah, I mean, I just have all the things that remind me of him and his pictures, and I'll light incense and go talk to him, or if it's a day that I'm working on something where I feel like I need his input, um, then it's a lot of talking to him. Um, but yeah, I feel like he's been very present throughout this whole process.
Mary Jo, who follows quite a lot of our stuff, is asking the question, how many days did it take to go get Brent and bring him home? She's not trying to be morbid, but she was, but was, I'm sorry. Oh yeah. Was he embalmed over there or was it, no, that happened over here.
Yeah.
And yes, he did have a neck wound. She was just curious about, that.
I honestly, it's kind of a blur. I want to say a week and a half. But I don't know. You might know better than me, Jeff, because you were talking to me
Actually,
every day.
I remember when you were over there and I was there for just like 3 or 4 days. And then I had to fly to New York to finish part of the project I was working on for like a couple days. And I turned back around and flew home, or I mean, to Little Rock again. It must have been 5, 6 days.
Yeah.
But I do remember when he was in um, the funeral home that day, and they dressed him and put him together pretty quickly. And I
Yeah.
remember you also dressed him in Ukraine before he came back because you wanted him to be presentable when he arrived.
Yeah, and I did have a conversation with them about it because I did not want, I did want to document what had happened to him. And so there were stages of him being, prepared to come home for our family to see him. But when you see me filming him, he had been cleaned up a little bit, but still enough of the war wounds to be able to document it.
Here's an interesting question because we know how important Brent's dog was to him, and the
Yeah.
question was, is what happened to Brent's dog? Brent's dog passed away
Yeah.
before Brent
Brett. Yeah.
did. I'll do a couple more questions. When he watched the film, I really cherished the humanity within the insanity. And I've watched it a few times now and see different details and uh, want to take away seeing the unseen.
That's a good way to put it. It's a very accurate way to describe it.
I mean, I think this is probably a pretty good time to wrap up. I appreciate everybody for being on here. You guys are the ones who are on here tonight. I think they're the paid subscribers, and we're going to give it a day or so. You guys were participating in it, and the people who are non-paid subscribers will get a chance to watch this, but they're obviously not in a position where you guys are. You can ask questions, interact. But just wanted to thank Craig for being a part of this tonight. He juggled his schedule and his kids' karate lessons to make sure he could be here. And if you haven't seen, Armed Only with the Camera on HBO Max, go take a look at it. And if you know anybody who's still trying to figure out whether they should subscribe, this is a great example of the kind of stuff, the content we're going to bring to you over the next however long we can keep doing this stuff. And so for all of you guys who spent time and invested your time and money into watching this, just want to thank Craig for being here tonight. And
Yeah, and I've been reading everybody's comments while we've been talking. I really appreciate everybody. I think I've managed to see everybody's comments throughout this, and it's really nice to hear that.
yeah. So I'll talk to you in a couple days, bro. Okay.
All right, sounds good.
I love you,
Thanks,
man.
everybody. All right, love you
All
too.
right. Last thing for you guys, the Brent Renaud Foundation. Go find it on Brent Renaud Foundation.
I'll link it in
Yeah.
the posting.
Holly's going to link it in the posting, and we'll send it out on our Facebook page, personal Facebook page, and we'll also send it out on the From the Writer's Cabin on that Facebook page and From the Writer's Cabin here. So you guys, the work that, real quick, Craig, the work that you guys are doing now, the work that we're going to be doing soon, probably here at the cabins. Just explain that to them really quick. You guys have had a real long discussion about what the foundation's going to support and why.
Yeah, I mean, we started off talking a lot about youth mentorship and giving emerging filmmakers that experience because we had great mentors, and now it's really evolving into feeling like we need to support journalists at this time, and so we're trying to kind of figure out exactly what that niche will be because there's a lot of great organizations like Committee to Protect Journalists and James Foley Foundation that are doing really good work. So, I think we will find our niche in terms of just supporting filmmakers who want to do this. If they need the training, if they need the experience, we will be there to mentor them. So.
And some of those people are transitioning to a life that after, many, many years of covering this stuff are going back into the other kind of journalism, which is the stuff that's not in conflict zones. And just this year, I remember I called Craig up, and we had a friend that both Craig and myself and Brent worked with on a number of projects, both in Somalia and in Libya. Was literally a Georgian from the Republic of Georgia, who was a cameraman for me at Vice, and then worked on the Somalia project and the Libya project. Was transitioning to a life outside of those places, and was trying to escape where he was at and get into France, where we could live with his family. And you guys stepped up and supported that with money that was donated by regular guys like you guys. So sometimes $10 doesn't sound like a lot, or $100 doesn't sound like a lot, but it adds up, especially if you get, like 100,000 people on my Facebook page looking at it. You might get $10,000 or $20,000 out of that. And so that money goes a long way to supporting journalists who, the hardest part people don't understand is when you're transitioning from war journalism back into the regular journalism world, you're now competing with people who've been doing that regular world for 20 years. Maybe it's studio work. Maybe it's working with different new technology cameras that you're not really allowed to carry in the war zone because they're too heavy. And so these people have a very particular niche when they cover war journalism. And it sounds like this incredible job, but when you go back to compete with other people in places like New York and France and Paris and London, you're competing against people who are longtime union people, and they're not really letting you in the club. You know what I mean? It's, just like it's hard to be a misfit, right? You try to be a misfit, you can't get in without paying a fee. Anyways, the idea that, these people have an easy transition because they're famous from war journalism is not true at all. And so some of the stuff that they're doing is going to support those people in the transition of that. So just, if you have time and a little bit of credit card time on your credit card, a little bit left in that, your, what do they call that? Your limit, your credit card limit, hit that limit, baby, and help honor Brent Renaud with the Brent Renaud Foundation. Okay, guys, thank you so much. We appreciate it. I'll talk to you soon. Okay, Craig.
All right. Bye. Good night.
Thank you, guys. Have a good night.